Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's going to be a wild ride.
This is going to be another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is going to be Frod, who is a veteran Counter-Strike player and now a Valorant coach. But we actually did do one of these a few years ago, which summarised basically the 1.6 career. And then at the time, actually, no one knew what was going to happen in CSGO. But I want to go back in time a little bit, Frod, to the glory days and ask a few questions that, understandably, you played for so long. We couldn't cover everything, even though it was hours long. So I noticed when I went back, we did a good job of telling the story of the teams you were in, but one thing I didn't actually sort of explicitly ask you was, in your case, one thing I always thought was cool about your teams under United 5 and then going over to Call was you guys had to come up. You had to go around the veterans. You didn't just get to join like the K-Sharps and the Rambos and all that. You had to sort of like actually sort of almost be blocked by them and then find your own way around them and actually beat them. So what I wanted to know was, were you someone where, I know back in the day, some of those players who were the OG elites and they used to think they could never lose a LAN and, you know, they'd always be as good as the Europeans. I know some of them were quite cocky, mate, and they did sort of like, when people came along and were talented, they would do the classic thing, you cheat or, you know, oh, he's weird and stuff because they haven't met you or whatever. Did you ever feel a kind of like a sense that people were holding you back or they didn't want to give you a try?
Oh, yeah, 1,000%, man. I mean, even in something so simple as SOPUG, which was that like elite group that you had to be voted in, I basically bypassed the voting system because I think I got denied so many times that I ended up saying, fuck it, I don't even want to be a part of this anymore, until I got so good that they're like, here's a direct invite. So there was so much of that went on. I guess that's why we were all like our like rejects in some ways from our own teams, and we had to find our own way because breaking into that little friend group or that little clique at the top was extremely hard. So I think I can't really speak for my teammates, but my biggest focus was just being so good that they can't deny you. So that was kind of my motto when it came to that is, oh, these guys are going to treat me like I'm a nobody and I don't deserve to be here. I'm going to show them. And then when I'm at the top, I'm not going to be like that back to them, but I'm going to remind them that, you know, what they did. And this is wrong. Like this whole gatekeeping stuff is wrong. That's why I'm a big advocate of that. You know, there's I always say this to at least the guys nowadays, like there's a new champion born every day. You can't just like start gatekeeping some of these young kids, you know, and yeah, I just think it's like a wrong mentality because at the end of the day, this is a performance-based business. This isn't like some sort of clique nepotism-based business, even though that obviously is a big factor in how people will succeed. But the reality is this is competitive and we're all here to be the best at what we do, and the people who work the hardest and, you know, put up the results, the ones that deserve that, not the people who are just there for the longest time.
When you did get to the top with Complexity, and this was a team that itself could win international tournaments and be very competitive and just as good as the Team 3Ds of the world, what did you actually think of Team 3D? Because if you remember, that was the era when they would still have all the big names. They had like all-star looking team, but I always thought they were kind of a bit underwhelming. Like they weren't as good as your team, quite frankly, right? It's actually only sometimes at the odd qualifier, maybe they beat you directly, but didn't you feel like you always outperformed? What did you think of them at the time?
I mean, they kind of had this aura around them, so you kind of felt like, oh my God, they're the best. But once they decided to start accepting some of our scrims, because, you know, we were just like blacklisted from being able to scrim them for the most part, we started destroying them, and that kind of carried on. And, you know, we started realizing that their play isn't really as solid as ours. Like, we obviously had really good talent, but I think our biggest focus as a team was our teamwork, our strategies. Like, we had a lot of depth to that. That was something that the U5 team brought over. And I realized, like, man, these 3D guys don't really have this kind of level of depth, you know? Even just dealing with Rambo later on, like he's a great IGL and stuff like that. But when it comes to the creation of tactics, game plans, and things like that, that wasn't like I would say his biggest focus, and that was something that was an integral part of why Complexity was good. So it took us a while to adjust to make him the IGL that we wanted in our team, because we had a system and we were not going to forfeit that system based on how we knew it worked. And we felt like 3D was probably more freestyle-y, and that's kind of paid out that way because even just little things like K-Sharp never buying an op on LAN, things like that, like we kind of noticed that there was some tendencies that these guys were different beasts when they were playing online and on LAN. So I think a lot of it came down to us just worrying about ourselves, putting the pressure on them, and having so much tactical like depth in our background that we were able to adapt to what we needed. And I think a lot of the games that we ended up losing to 3D, like some qualifiers, like 8con5, things like that, I think a lot of it felt like they just clutched up. Like it didn't feel like a strat diff or something like that. It just felt like, man, they just won the key moments, some rounds that just gave it to them. But we felt like we were in control the majority of the time. I mean, I don't even remember. I saw like our got frag, some video that from a while back. It was like we were like 20 or 30 to like 7 or 8 against.
All right.
Like we demolished them. Like it wasn't really like a rivalry. Rivalries are supposed to be close. It's not a rivalry if we're just stomping them out. I would say it was probably more of a rivalry with us between the California teams, like we were and stuff like that.
Right.
Because those guys, we traded wins back and forth, and maybe in some weird world, they probably had more of those key victories than we had against them in those moments because they eliminated us from a CPL and stuff like that. They won some qualifiers. So for us, like we always feel like they were more close to our level than 3D, quite frankly. They just had the hype and the salary and all that jazz, which was fine, but it wasn't really like what we thought was a rival like that.
As you say, one of the mistakes I do think Team 3D made, because obviously their solution was like just recruit another star player, whoever's doing the worst, recruit another big star player. But I agree with you. They essentially, in the modern day, the parlance would be they just were kind of a default team and they just hoped people fragged out, and people did things like Rambo win a clutch or method frag everyone. Shagwar, when he came, hit some op shots. It did always feel like they were a bit resistant to like tactical play at the time. People considered European CS to be tactical. If people don't know, Complexity absolutely was a team that put many hours in practice servers, running smokes and dry runs and all sorts of these things. Right? You guys really embraced that side of the game, right?
Yeah, that was something that really was created around the time of U5 with Hair. Just that team and that mindset. We really started focusing a lot more on the dry run aspect and timings of our strats than like actually scrimming. We felt like. So like when we started getting really good at Dust 2, because Dust 2 used to be the grand finals map everywhere. It's like if you wanted to win a tournament, you had to be good on Dust 2. So we started coming up with our slow defaults and methods to it and how we approached it, like timing based execs. Like at 35, we're throwing this flash. At 28, we're throwing this flash. We're taking this space at X time. So everything was coordinated. We had it down to spawn based as well. Like our dry runs, we had a lot of like spawn based strats where everyone had to, the moment that you spawned, you had to call a number 1 through 5, and that was the role that you had in that round. So it was like, especially on Nuke, where a lot of like spawn-based rush strats, it was like we would just dry run, boom, everyone, until everyone got a number a couple times, and that was our dry run session for that strat. And that was kind of what we did on every strat, every map. That's kind of changed a lot nowadays because, especially with Valorant, there's like these blue walls. You can't really do spawn-based type strats anymore, at least in Valorant. But that was a level of tactical depth that we had, and that was from day one. And I felt like that was probably one of our biggest advantages because we like. Excuse is a bad word, but like if we played bad, we had like 2 excuses, which was one was maybe we weren't fragging, and maybe the other one was our strats. It's like one could carry the other no matter what. So it's like if we were fragging, we could win. If our strats were on point, we could win. If both were bad, we would lose, obviously. But we can deal with one or the other. And like my ability to get some kills in key moments and stuff, that helped us win some games. But for the most part, the comfort and the confidence always came from the strats and the practice that we had, because I felt like that was something that we focused the most on in comparison to everyone. And we kind of had like our own secret sauce as to like what made us a good team, creating strategies and everything. And I think that because we kept our core intact for so long, that kind of mindset was able to spread around to different teams and just kind of stayed in-house and helped us keep our dominance.
People will know, especially if they ever look up the old stats or see the interviews at the time. Obviously, you were a star player. You were considered like best AWPer in the world, etc. But I do feel like some of the other names in this team maybe over time have been forgotten, or people forget their role. And so the player I want to ask about, I didn't actually ask about in the last interview, I looked up some of the questions, was I didn't ask you about Storm. And if people don't know, this was a guy who was an impact player, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was probably one of the most gifted people I've ever seen as far as like being a teammate. Well, I take it back. Zet was probably by far that guy. But when it came to certain things like Storm, every single time in freeze time, he would crouch spam and flick at heads, like during free, like our heads. Like, so he was like aim training before aim training was even a thing.
Right.
He was the one that was really doing that, like crouch spamming and that movement stuff like Volcano was back in the day, and his movement was completely on point. I learned my rifle skills and my techniques from Storm, just being his teammate, watching him when I'm dead. When I see the way that he moves, the way that he plays, the way that he taps the rifle and stuff like that, I'm like, okay, this is the way to do it. Warden was more of like a sprayer. I'd use like max res versus 640. So for me, I wasn't really down to spray that much. So I was like, man, Storm, his style fits my style more calculated, especially when I'm being a calculated rifle is so much of a polar opposite to being like a loose AWPer like I was. So I felt like it would benefit me more to change my playstyle like that when I was a rifler versus continuing that aggressive pace with the rifle, because maybe I wasn't as so confident taking all those 1v3s and spraying down people. So I kind of had that more like rifle aspect where I can hold down an angle and just like 3 or 4 bullet tap someone to death. And like, yeah, Storm was pretty much that guy that I learned everything from. I used to think he cheat, but like that's how everyone started.
did.
And
yeah, sure.
yeah, when he was on Agent, and I was like, yeah, but this guy must have some sort of skill. And he was a freak. I told my guys this to this day. I mean, he's the only guy I've ever met that uses num keys to go forward, and he uses mouse 2 to go forward. He uses shift to zoom. Like, this guy was the weirdest thing I've ever met in my life. I mean, I would say he's probably the weirdest. Rambo played inverted, and that was just like a mind fuck, you know? Like, it was just impossible to get a kill in a DM playing inverted, but that was just he played default other than that. But Storm was just like a gifted freak. Like, probably the best aimer I've ever had. And at least when it comes to like tactically, his keyboard, his understanding of how to move and everything like that, it was better than none. And I think that some of those limitations, like, I think he had that because he played Doom or something like that, where it was like run forward with mouse 2.
Sure.
And he just kind of kept that. And I was like, man, I've never met a guy who runs forward with mouse 2. And I was like, how the hell do you no scope people when you have to hit zoom? He's like, oh, I hit shift. I'm like, what is this? You know, I was mind blown. And I was like, whatever, I'm not going to say nothing because in my opinion, he's like one of the best players. And we always kind of got along. Me and Tyler share the same birthday. So we were always like really good friends and really close like that. Just from like having the same kind of understanding and everything, even though we were complete polar opposites. You know, he's like from Middle America and I'm from Miami, Hispanic from Miami. So we're so different. But at the same time, his level of skill and talent was like absurd, you know, especially mechanics. It was top notch, unmatched. And it was just a clutch player, very dedicated. I mean, these like guys like him, guys like Warden, you know, guys that I play with forever, like never late to practice, never had a day off from practice. You know, it's like guys that were just, you can rely on every single day, no matter what. And for me, I think that, you know, having those guys as my teammates for so long was such a huge part of my success. And I think why all of us were able to, you know, be good.
One thing you referenced there that I also will be something people might not understand or would be a misconception about you is you weren't one of those AWPers where it's like if you don't have the AWP, you're just not in the round, like, or you just play on the pistols. You had a very good rifle. Like your AK was tearing people up. You've had tournaments where you've been in the finals and just had like a T-half on a map where you've torn people up with the AK, right?
Yeah. I mean, ever since the U5 days, you know, we had the mindset of like, for example, like T-side Inferno, I didn't op unless maybe it fell on my lap. T-side nuke, I didn't op. Even sometimes CT side, depending on how we wanted to play. So there was maps that I was just kind of banned from opping just because it didn't make sense into what we were trying to do for the longest time. So I had to force myself to get good that way. You know, there was a lot of one tricks like that, and that's the last thing I wanted. I didn't want to be a liability when it came to doing those things. I wanted to be able to, you know, because like kind of what we talked about, those spawn-based strats, there was so many things that were very important. And if I was not able to have a rifle, I was the asshole in dry runs that was like, well, I'm the 4 always, guys. Sorry. Regardless of the spawn, I'm the 4. I'm just going to go chill because I can't do the roles. So I didn't want people to have that perception of me as someone that like couldn't fill whatever role, whether it was the guy running in first, whether it was the guy making that late flank outside to garage or whatever. Like I wanted to have all those skill sets within, you know, my repertoire. And I think that's why it's helped me a lot, even like right now on my coaching side, because I tell people all the time, like, yeah, I was that aggressive opper. It's hard to explain to you what I used to do, but just know I used to just rush people all the time with an op. But I also know how to play slow and smart and lurk and all these things, because in my team, I had, in my opinion, the best people at those roles doing those jobs, and I was able to watch them for so long. So it's not that I know exactly what to do or how to do, but just watching them and learning from them, I was able to be good enough and, you know, serviceable in those aspects. And those guys were the best at what they did. And I'm really just trying to explain to people more of like the concepts and how we do things rather than exactly what to do, because at the same time, you kind of want everyone's creative freedom in what they do.
Another thing is, when you actually were AWPing, people might not know this, but you were someone who, it wasn't literally just like a brain dead AWP, like, right, I just see someone on my screen, I do a crazy flick. Like, you understood a lot of concepts. Actually, I mean, we'll talk about this in a second, but when we did that guide, I actually realized how much more there was to some of the ways of thinking about a round, setting it up, like what you did in the past round, thinking what the opponent knows. I was there last time. You had a lot of like thought went into doing this. It wasn't just hitting flick shots, right? Yeah,
of course. For me, everything that I did had a purpose. Like even when I played those 10-mans or those SOPUGs that I wanted to get into, was more to see how other people played, study their play style, where I can apply some pressure, where they don't like to play, how they like to play. So hey, this is competition, man. I mean, people at the end of the day, they probably thought I was just some brain dead fragger because maybe my play style was seen as that from the outside looking in. But everyone, I would say, that played with me probably understands that, because, you know, when they would, early on in my career, when Hair would be like, man, why are you pushing here, doing that. I'm like, man, because I killed the guy. The rotations are going to take a little bit of time. Like, there's a reason to why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like, at least let me get my thought process out. You might be wrong, but at least hear me out. And I think that was the biggest part that I appreciated so much from having guys like Hare, guys like Trip, Warden, all these guys that were kind of those IGL figures, because we had conversations. It wasn't like, oh, you just do what I tell you to do. No, it was like, let me explain my part, explain to you why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then there most of the response was just make sure you do that shit on land. Like, don't change your play style. If this is how you're gonna play, this is what you're gonna do. Just make sure that you do that, because the moment that you start adjusting your play style from one place to the other, we're gonna suffer now. You might still frag out, but we're going to suffer being your teammates. We're going to lose your timings. We're going to lose like how you play and how to play off of you in certain situations. So I was like, don't worry, guys. Like, I'm going to have that confidence. Like, I may miss my shots, but I'm still going to rush in first and try and no-scope someone in a certain situation, for example. And I think that was probably the main difference between me and a lot of operators, is that I don't think that some guys know that is, and that's why, coaching now is so beneficial in that way, is I explain people, like, you have to keep your same play style, because if not, you're screwing over everyone else around you, not yourself. You'll be fine because you'll get your kills. You're a good player, but you really have to. The point of practice is to prepare our timings and things like that, and you can't just focus solely on yourself. Everyone needs to be on the same page, and that really includes like you playing the same way, whether you're playing online or on land, whether you're playing good or you're playing bad. Like, your teammates have some sort of expectation.
What about a teammate I also didn't explicitly ask about is Warden, but I wanted to ask from this perspective. He was the first of that team to go and start doing coaching. Obviously, he even coached with Complexity in CSGO. And he's one of those people where I have to say, I didn't know how it would work out like tactically and that sort of, but to me, it was just an obvious player to become a coach. Because one thing I learned from getting to know him in 1.6 was he had skills, but I feel like one of the big things he brought to a team was he was kind of that like glue guy, right? He's the guy where he knows how to be friends with everyone, and he knows, like, on the one hand, he can like get people hyped, but I also feel like in a lot of teams back then, people were kind of a bit ruthless sometimes. They were just sort of like, right, you turn up, you play your Cal games. If you frag, great. If you don't, maybe on the LAN you have some friendships, there's little cliques within teams. This guy seemed like he understood the social side of CS, right?
Yeah. I would say Warden is probably one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. Just as far as like exchanging ideas and shooting the shit with him. Like, yeah, man, I laughed for hours with Matt, and I think that was probably a huge aspect to him, because we had that mindset of it's not like the world's not going to end if we lost the game. And I always tell people we lost more than we won, but we won a lot, which is great, but we lost a lot. So I think our biggest strength was understanding how to take those losses. I was looking back with one of my managers the other day. It was like every time I won some big event, the previous event, I got completely murdered out of a grand finals, It was like, I think we lost like 13-2 in CPL Spain or something like that, 16-2, and then we ended up winning ESWC right after. Same thing happened in WSVG. So there was a couple. It was all about our bounce back, and I think that's what that family side of our team, the sacrifices that we made all together, and the fact that we kept our team together for so long. I think that those things were what helped us overcome those moments, because that could really break teams. A lot of teams, like even 3D, they were always on pursuit for a new player. They were always trying to get after me, for example. So that might linger over some players' heads. That was never a situation in Complexity. We only made a change when we absolutely had to, when someone stepped down or retired or whatever. So we tried to limit all that, and there was no distractions. It's really just focus on gaming.
Back in the day, another player as well that obviously now everyone in CSGO knows is obviously Moses, because he was back in the old U5 with you. What they won't know is no one remembers what Moses is like. It's so long ago now. No one knows what he's like as a player. So who was Moses as a player and teammate?
Yeah, he was always a really good teammate. He was kind of like me in a sense, because me and him were both the really young ones, and we were kind of like the defiant ones against Hare, which was the brother. I wish I could say the things that he would, but like I would kind of live vicariously through Moses when he would, give shit to Hare, like giving him stuff. But I like that, because I was like, me and Jason were trying to be a little bit more innovative and thinking outside the box in some situations, whereas Hare was very structured, which we needed, of course, but at the same time we were trying to do that. And I think that just that kind of family atmosphere that we had, and that team, that good teamwork. Like, Jason was always a very, very good player. And it was kind of a shame, because after that U5 team had its falling out, where the teams kind of merged with the old Complexity, and guys like myself got left out. Moses also got left out, and he just, never came back. But I always felt like early on that he was like a talent that if he stayed playing, he would have been up there. I mean, maybe me and him would have probably kept playing together, because I always had a great relationship, and, we always kind of seen eye to eye and everything like that. It was just unfortunate. He just, I guess, got where I got mad and wanted to destroy them, he got mad and said, I'm just going to do different things.
Right.
He had hair back then, so he probably had a lot more like fun,
Sure.
out and about. So I think that was around the college days. So, but yeah, Jason Moses was always like a really talented player. And he was one of those guys that knew how to play the game and trying to like change a little bit, play aggressive. And it's very cool to see where he's at now. Even towards my ending out in like the CS scene and him kind of coming back. We had a couple good years hanging out in Dallas when he lived there before I moved back to Florida. And that's when he was able to kind of, I think he replaced me when I stepped down on the CS team. Like the cultivation, like some makeshift team. And then from there on out, he kind of just kept playing and then transitioned to casting, and the rest is history. So always been like a very big fan of his. And that's actually pretty funny. Around that time, he was living with Potter. So me, him, and Potter were really good friends just from hanging out and being like retired gamers, like in the early 2010s, just kind of hanging out in the Dallas area. So it was really cool.
By the way, it goes without saying, because I know you, but I'll ask just for the fans, right? When you were at your peak and you had the AWP, you thought you were the best AWPer.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. I mean, I always had, like, one thing that I'll always say with everyone is I have massive respect for everyone, but there's no doubt that I'm better than you. Like, even when it comes to Cogu and stuff like that, there's conversations. Like, in my mind, I believe Cogu thinks I'm better than him. But at the same time, I have so much respect for Cogu that I can't just sit there and say like, oh, he wasn't maybe better than me, or maybe he didn't have a better career than me. But when I think of it, I think there's no doubt that I left an impression on their mind that I was better than them. And a lot of it is up to opinion. But when you kind of like get older and look back on it, you're like, if people think I'm top 2, top 3, that's good enough for me, because it's all opinion based. But yeah, I felt like for sure I was the best. I mean, I worked my ass off, so I felt like I deserved that kind of like there's that balance between confidence and cockiness. And I felt like it always, even people perceived it as cockiness, but for me it was confidence, because there's no one that worked more than me. And I really focused on CS, even from my own teammates. My teammates knew that I worked harder than them. After practice, they would go play World of Warcraft, do whatever. I'd be playing pugs and grinding. So, I deserved what I got because I worked my ass off for it. So my confidence came from that.
I feel like that's why it's kind of a bit funny that you've ended up coaching Brazilian teams, because people must reference Cogu to you all the time when they talk about the old school, right?
Yeah. I mean, even when I was at the MIBR offices, you're like, oh, you see this chick? I was like, yeah, I got that one at my house too. So what are we talking about? Like the ESWC. It's like I have a good amount here too. So because I was able to take that check home. So sure. I always kind of give a little bit of crap back, because I'm like, man, a lot of these kids nowadays, like they just hear these stuff. I'm like, man, I was that guy. You just gotta believe me,
You referenced it earlier, but because it was just the nature of how they did it, if people don't know, basically Team 3D, they even thought they were like the Yankees or something. They just tried to buy all the best players constantly, and that was their strategy, because not only do you sort of like make the other team weaker, but then you just hopefully get more skill, right? Over the years, obviously, I know they asked pretty much every star. They asked you loads of times, right? Because you were friends with Rambo, right? You were friends with Method, some of these guys. So was there ever a moment you thought about going and doing the move?
I think maybe the only time that I would have potentially considered it was maybe like the CGS transition, just because no one knew like how things were going to be. But at the same time, like I really wasn't interested in that. I mean, in some weird way, I kind of had like an open offer from them, as far as like, we want you. Like they courted me so many times that I was like, yo, whenever you want, just come on board. And it was kind of like, you know what? I'm not interested. I just really like my team. And for whatever reason, it's not that I didn't want to join 3D, is that I wanted to play with my boys. And they really only just wanted me, or maybe they valued some of their pieces more than I thought that they should value them. And it was more of like, if you just want me, you don't even want to like try and make the team around me, or try and get like Warden or Storm or some of these guys. Like, I mean, it's not even a conversation, right? Like, I'm going to make more money by winning more than you guys. And it's very, very simple. They couldn't offer me a salary high enough that would make me make more money than what I would make by winning. And plus the satisfaction of winning, that alone to me was like more than enough, right? So money was never why I played the game for. It was just nice to have, I guess. And like prize money, like I didn't give a shit about that. I just wanted the trophy. That's why I was able to, take some of those trophies home, because some of my teammates didn't want to carry them. They didn't want to take that fake check all the way from Paris. I was like, yo, if I'm taking this and I'm carrying it, it's coming home with me. And that happened almost every time. So I'm grateful enough to have a lot of those, but that was, something that we all achieved as a team together.
Right. When it comes to that time where, as you say, CGS happened, and so because there was like a chance for roster moves, Rambo joined your team along with Zet from Europe, and you made this new squad, right? I think you even told this story before. It was a bit awkward because if people don't know, it was supposed to be a package deal of Method and Rambo both coming over. And listen, no offense to Rambo, but in that equation, it was more the Method side of it. And so in the end, it was like, no, we've got to... Now listen, replacing Method with Zet's pretty good. But the reason what this sets up is, as you referenced earlier, Rambo was at once upon a time probably the best North American player, and he was like an IGL, but in the loose sense, you have like a few simple strats. And the thing is, in 1.6, a different game, he was really fucking good. Like, I thought it was amazing how good he was. But you could see in CS Source, he wasn't as good a player. And as you say, when it's just being the IGL, I mean, there was eventually some friction in this team, right? It kind of got a bit awkward, I imagine.
Yeah, because we just had a different outlook on stuff. Like, we were like more purists in some ways. Like, we wanted to just keep our stuff like strategies and focused, and let our skill be what helps us when we're having a tough time. And I felt like he just wanted to just like frag out and loose out in some moments. And like I said, we had a system and how we wanted to play, and we didn't recruit him for his system. We brought him to fit into our system,
right?
And we were trying to find the IGL who can do what we can do. And if you can't do it, then because of the way that our system is, maybe Warden could do it, maybe I could do it, maybe someone else could do it, because the way it worked is we all made our strategies. We basically were all coaches, but all five of us, like whatever you would think a coach does now, we did as players, like the VOD reviewing, creating strategies, dry running, everything like that, playbooks, all that. But yeah, going back to what you were saying, like we never had intention of even getting a second player. We only wanted Method. But then it became a conversation of like, well, I'm only going to go if I get Rambo. So I was like, oh shit, okay, so how are we going to make this work? Like, that was something that we never wanted to do because we didn't want to get rid of Trip. It was just something that we had to do because of Method. And then he ended up signing and changing his decision like 24 hours later. And it was kind of like, well, we didn't want this from day one. So what the hell are we going to do now? And Trip's already gone. He's already pissed off at us because we told him he's gone. We can't get him back, even though we thought about it and maybe tried, I think. And they were like, all right, well, fuck it. We'll just, I guess, kind of settle for this move right now. And we ended up figuring like, who else can we get in this role that was like on that high level of Method, and Zed was instantly someone that popped into our eye just because we knew how talented he was. And I also made some good friends with him at some of these tournaments that we were at, and I just realized like he's like exactly what we were looking for, like young kid, just highly motivated, highly talented, and just wanted to game. So for us, it kind of seemed like a natural fit. It ended up working out fantastic in the end. But yeah, we were left scrambling because ideally we were just going after Method to slot him into that role and call it a day. And we ended up kind of having to kick our IGL that we didn't want to, because I think that Trip still had a couple good years left in him. He ended up winning CGS after he was getting into his poker grind. So he kind of understood that, he can make a living not playing CS. But at the end of the day, Trip was, in our mind, a very good player, probably just as good as Rambo in that way. But since he knew us, knew our system, and knew everything, ever since he was like on Dictators of Fate and stuff like that, like before the U5 days, like me and him were always on the same page when it came to tactics and everything, because Trip was one of the guys that was on that U5 team as well. So we used to go way, way back when it came to our thought process of the game. And it was kind of hard for me to do that, but it was something that I was like, well, he's going to be gone in maybe a year or so, and we really need to get Method. So it was an unfortunate situation, and kind of bit us in the ass as we got dead last place almost every year as a franchise, even though our team was good, and he ended up winning CGS.
Sure. What about when you talk about Zet? I will say, because when I did that guide, I came to Texas and I stayed for like a week, and I would watch you guys when you were scrimming and you were playing. And every time you weren't scrimming for CGS, people like Zet and you would play like 10 mans in CS 1.6. Even at the time, it was like, you're not allowed to say you are because you had to pretend you were playing Source, but they were always playing 1.6. They were playing a bit of 1.6 on the side, and he would obviously do stuff like play like Rocket League for hours and hours and hours. And I have to say, mate, there's been a lot of people who've been called like mega talents in CS games and stuff. This guy was the truth, mate. I remember watching him just play like Rocket League, not even his game, and he would do that
you saw
thing
those
where
360s?
Dude, he would be not only hitting insane shots like with the sensitivity, but you know in Rocket League it's like 1v1 and you wait your turn. Dude, he would be doing winner stay on and just be there for like an hour and all the players are just like cycling through and he's just beating them all. Like his actual skill was insane, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think he would beat us like 1v3, 1v4. Like some of the things I've seen him do with the mouse is unreal. That's why I would say like people don't give some credit to some of those guys nowadays because they view guys like Shroud as like aimer talents and stuff. And I agree, Shroud is a gift when it comes to his aim wise, but Shroud isn't the first and he won't be the last. You know what I'm saying? Guys like Zed, that guy could have gone pro in any one-on-one game, probably any game in the world. He's the best skilled. That's why when Wally sent that the other day, when I saw his post, I was like, yeah, I completely agree. And I've never seen the things, even to this day, being in esports for so long, I've never seen the things that he's done before, like in Rocket Arena, even in Source. Like those 360 things, he would do that with a Deagle in Source. We're like, don't fucking do that in the matches, bro. Like get away with it in the scrims, show off a little bit, but please don't do this stuff. Like you're gonna I was like, you're gonna get Jason really pissed, you know. I was like, I know how to like kind of showboat a little bit in the game like that, like get a nice fancy no scope. I'm like, not when you're busting out 360s. This is different level of stuff. But I appreciated it because he was like that. And you know, even for someone like myself, I was a Call of Duty professional. Like when the game came out, at the same time I was in Complexity. Jason like hated that I would go and after practice go play with my Call of Duty PC team and play in like an online league and stuff like that. So I mean, ever since 2004, 2005, I was like, you know, playing multiple games, being the top in both. I won a league in Call of Duty 1. I also had a little stint in Overwatch 2. So I was like, man, I still headshot to this day, even at 37. Like I know that my reaction time isn't as good, but when I play Valorant and stuff like that, I compete at a pretty high level. I would say, you know, I could make it to Radiant no problem, and like those top echelons, it's just all about the time I could put into the game, right? Like I'm married, have a kid now, so it's kind of like, yeah, I still put in a lot of time. I dedicate myself fully, but I have to prioritize stuff, and my job as being a coach and mentor and creating these strategies takes my love to play the game some myself, but I still try and game as much as I can because gotta let these guys know, like, age is just a number, you know. Even guys like Angel and stuff, like if those guys can go pro, like there's not a doubt in my mind that I can go pro too. I just have been retired so long, and after what happened to me in my comeback in CS, I didn't necessarily know if I wanted to experience that again as a player. So being a coach was kind of like a pretty cool transition to it all.
So I referenced earlier that we actually wrote a guide to Counter-Strike. The Art of Fraud was the joke because the other one was called The Art of Counter-Strike. So we want this one to be unique to you. In fact, nowadays, basically, because it was so many years ago, I'll even put a link in the description box. People can download it if they want. It's got little videos in and all descriptions. This is where, because the perception view was in AWPer, people do think AWPers are just brain dead. It's like, I just hit them on the screen. I actually knew you would potentially have a future as a coach because when we wrote this guide, I can tell you, put it this way, with no diss to Rambo, when I wrote that guide with him, it was more like I had to just think of a million ways to stimulate him to come up with the next point and the next aspect. In your case, it was more like I just showed you the topic, you would just write it down. I would just essentially just rewrite it to look better in the guide. But it's like you were giving me 99% of the material, like it was all coming from you. Yeah. It made me realize you had like a whole philosophy on the game.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like I read that TAO CS guide and I was like, damn, this shit's basic as hell, and not like in a disrespectful way, but more of like this is gonna help people grow, but like what is it gonna do for me, or like for a guy in my level, a guy who's trying to, like, I can't break it past the top X, you know, but you're at the top. So that's why for me I was like, man, this is such like a basic way of thinking when you need to really start thinking this more of like a sports thing. And yeah, that was huge for me because even to this day, like those guides, people still, like, even my team last year with Loud, now at MIBR, like some of these guys, like they have read some things. We have like gone back and looked at it and pop some things and kind of explain to them because, yeah, Valorant's a different game, but at the end of the day, the fundamentals are the same when it comes to trade fragging, how to play post plans, how to retake. You just add some different abilities or something like that. But when it comes to how to play the game and how to like the concepts of FPS, like it's concepts of FPS. It can apply to any game depending on, you know, how the game is and how the game is played out and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, for me, I think that was something that I always wanted to prove because, you know, getting into coaching, you kind of start off as man, I would say the majority of the coaches out there are like who you know, not what you know. Like you're a friend coach. So in order to break into that, it's like, yeah, of course, I got my first way into coaching by who I knew, which was Brax, getting me a spot in an invite team with him. But once things started going south with Brax in that way, I was like, you know what? The last thing I want is for people to think that I'm only here because of someone like Brax. As much as I love him and respect him, and I appreciate him, pulling me back in to kind of do this role, the last thing I want is for my future and my success to be hinged on my connection with Brax. So it became like a super focus of mine to let people know the strategic depth that I have and doing those things. And we can get into that a little bit later, but it kind of ties back into we were saying, like, even the things that I did at Loud when we won champions a couple years ago was like the amount of tactical stuff that they were getting from me. You'd probably be like, holy shit, like this is some good stuff. And they did everything. They did all the pistol rounds, game plans, everything like that. They ended up winning champions, whereas I couldn't get a damn team and Invite America to listen to one default I had. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it really, a lot of it depends on who you're coaching and kind of what they perceive about you and stuff like that. And even when I was in my T1 days with in VALORANT, towards the end of T1 when I was with Days, like, you think he's going to listen to anything I have to say? It's like he probably has that same prejudice or whatever you want to say about me, like, oh, this guy just ran around and no-scoped everyone and he doesn't know anything. I'm the one that can default the team to victory. It's like, the fuck, dude? Like, you give me no credit. Like, I understand that, because my part was like, people don't really understand how good I was for how long I was. So people think that maybe I was like, there's got to be some sort of key to success there, right? Like, if I was like the best player, one of the best players for a couple of years, you might think, okay, he just had a really good stretch. But if I was like a dominant player for like 7-8 years, like had a really successful career for that long, that people nowadays, they don't even have half that many years. It's like, man, this guy must know something, right? It's like people don't give you that credit. And so I kind of had that same mindset as when I did as a player, as I do as a coach, was like, F everyone. I'm just going to outwork everyone and call it a day, Like, it's just very simple for me. So whatever I accomplish as a player is exactly what I want to accomplish as a coach. It's just not necessarily in my hands as much because I'm not in the server,
One thing I wanted to ask about, but I want to see where you're at on this one, because it seems like you're actually in a much better place in life in where you are thinking of your career. In the past, one thing I was kind of surprised by, even though I understand relationships go back and forth, was there was a time when you came back in CSGO where it was a bit awkward. Like, you had animosity towards Jason, and you even maybe wanted to sort of get things off your chest you didn't back in the day, and say about some of the things, some problems you had, or things where you had disagreements over things. Like, has that changed? Are you in a better place now?
Oh yeah, been a long time. I mean, a lot of it boiled down to just the reality of the situation. I'm a passionate guy, so obviously I'm going to make things personal in that way, and I doubt they were personal at all. Maybe that's just my perception, but the fact of the matter is, like, I think I was set up for failure, and I think they would agree 1,000%. I was supposed to, after 2-3 years of not even touching the game, I was supposed to get a new computer. I never got it until after I got cut. So I was playing on like 90 FPS while everyone's on 200 FPS. My job was supposed to start with complexity like the 1st of January. Because the major dates got changed, it ended up becoming like December 15. I was still working 7 to 6 p.m. my job at the bank.
Right.
Like, I had to work from 7 to 6 p.m., go home from 8 to 1 in the morning and scrim against Shroud and expect to perform on half of his FPS with 3 years not even touching the game. In a team that, like, at the time, I was told that they wanted me. They couldn't wait to have me. And the reality was that not one player wanted me on that team.
Right.
So it's kind of like, guys, how are you going to force me on a team? This is not going to work, right? Like, then I was given more time, no PC, all these things, and boom, 6 weeks, 7 weeks later, after I was able to leave my job, I got cut because the players did not want to even play with me from day one and give me that chance. And I understand this position that Jason and Warden were put in at the time. And yeah, I was just, a lot of it was emotion based because they knew how my family was. They knew that my family was not going to take too kind that I just left my successful banking career that I was doing very good at, making good money, to go back into gaming just to get fucked over like 5 weeks later. Like, not even 3 months, They might have collected like one paycheck or something like that because I didn't get paid the 2 weeks in January that I was there. And then after I got cut, I ended up getting that computer. I'm like, this is also backwards, And so, yeah, I felt like, and they would agree that I had all the reason to be that kind of way. But at the same time, I'm going to bounce back. And, even though I still, like, I have a good professional relationship with those guys, it'll probably never, ever be the same. I mean, there's some things like you just can't forget. And maybe they feel that same way too. I would love to talk and have coffee and stuff like that, but I've never even been to the Complexity headquarters.
All right.
I've never been invited out there. Have no idea what it looks like. So if that even exists for them anymore, because of the whole, they're not with the Cowboys or whatever. So yeah, it's not like I'm, on their list of like people to invite over to events.
Right.
There's probably a million people that have been there, but I've never been in that kind of sucks. But at the same time, I'm not on that team anymore. And my job is, and I've always told the guys, if you're not with me, you're against me. So they're against me. That's just how it is. If they ever want me on their team and stuff, then no problem. They don't compete in Valorant, so no problem. But and like I said, I always have respect for Jason, respect for Matt, but I think they would agree that what they did there was probably not ideal. And I expected a little bit more. Just from how many times I turned down 3D, how many times I kept Warden from getting cut from Jason, all these things from me getting sponsorships. I felt like, man, at least I was owed some honesty here. But it's esports, baby. It's just you live and you learn, and things don't change. I'm 37. I still see shit, brand new thing every day. So nothing surprises me anymore.
Because one thing I would just say on that topic is, that is one thing in esports. If it's going to get bigger, it's going to keep progressing, and we're going to have these legacy brands like the SK Gamings and the MIBRs and these brands that go back a long way. I want one day, no matter what the personal relationships, I want it to be like NBA and NFL. Like if you're some legendary, like if Barry Sanders, I don't care what his relationship was with the Detroit Lions office, like they're going to invite him to a big game and they're going to put on like a thing, hey, welcome back, Barry, and do a thing on the big Megatron. Like it would be cool if it was like, because I know when you think of complexity of the team, you think very fondly, right? It would be cool to have some connection, right?
You know who does that, right? For all the hate that these people might get, is those Call of Duty orgs, like the phases, like the optics, like they integrate their ex people who built those brands.
Yes.
Like if it wasn't for me, Complexity wouldn't have been anything in that day, regardless of the finances that were poured into it. Again, I've never even been to their headquarters. My photos probably plastered all over there, my jerseys all over there, but I'm not even, the relationship is so soured, if you will, that never even stepped foot there. At least Barry Sanders is allowed back. At least Barry Sanders and Sheila Ford Hamp have conversations. Calvin Johnson, at least they at least have conversation. That doesn't exist in esports like that, at least on the CS side, But it is what, like I said, I get it. I guess maybe if I was in the same situation, I'd think the same thing too. But at the same time, like, they know who I am. They know I'm a competitive person, and I don't have that kind of animosity. But yeah, like that's something that I do regret. Not regret, but like not. I wish we did have an esports, because I'm a big fan of sports and everything like that. And seeing like retired jerseys, former athletes come back and stuff like that. I mean, I think that's what allows people to understand that. And I guess in esports, we're just a lot of orgs are trying to capitalize on short-term memory and new followers who gives a shit about the legacy aspect of it in some way. So, every org has their own mindset of it. I'm glad that's why at least lately I've just been focusing more on my brand and forget my connection to whatever organization on that front, because legacy is only as much as the next kid can remember it by. So that's why my job is to continue to try and be that guy wherever I'm at, and now that I'm a coach, I want people to, like, most of these kids, they have no idea who the hell I was as a player, and their respect for me comes from my dedication as being their coach, not being a player. And slowly over time, they start figuring out, and I play some games with them, and they're like, "Damn, old man can shoot some heads," So I have to gain that kind of level of respect, but I much appreciate that than having that respect given to me without having to really work for it.
In CSGO, when you did some coaching, one thing I think is quite fun, and obviously anyone who's watching who's waiting for the Valorant part, this will be an interesting part for you, is you did coach Ye early on, and obviously he became like one of the best AWPers in Valorant. So do you remember what it was like to work with him back in the day? He was obviously quite young in his career.
Yeah, I mean, he was just like a super talent. He was someone that I instantly hit it off with, because he kind of reminded me a lot of myself as far as like being super dedicated, maybe a little bit odd in that way, like an outsider within your own team. So I was able to share a lot of bonds with him that way, had a lot of conversations about life, religion, everything like that. Really liked my time with Ye. And he was the kind of guy who would like pull me off to the side and ask me those kinds of questions, like what I would think, how I would think, and certain things like that. So he really got to try to understand my philosophy as like an individual player, not just a coach. And I loved it. I mean, I tell the guys, because the guys that I had on that Lazarus team, like they ended up doing so well. Like Zelsis right now is crushing it with Sentinels. Subrosa has been crushing it for a little while now. Dapper has been doing his thing and been doing well. Ye has been crushing it. The only one, maybe Brax, hasn't really been, but he's been going through his transitions and getting back into the streaming, and he's grinding. He's just maybe not at the forefront right now and stuff, but all those guys are very proud of because they've done a really, really good job and had nothing to do with me why they're where they are. But it was just nice to be able to share those ideas and kind of explain to them, like, if you just keep at it, like, good things will come your way. Just keep grinding. Don't just think that things are going to fall on your lap, Like, you're going to have to work your ass off for these things. And that's why I really, like, man, like, guys like Subrosa, like, the guy works his ass off. He streams all day long, every day. Like, those guys, like, they work hard and they deserve that. And guys like Ye, he put in so much damn time as an individual. He just had his things, like, where you just got to understand. It's like everyone, man. Like, you just got to be able to understand them and have conversations. And I feel like a lot of people probably just, like, talk at him rather than talk with him. And guys like him, he's got genius in his mind, kind of thing. You just got to find a way to get it out of him. You have to have a conversation to get it out. He's not just going to naturally tell you, or in the heat of the moment, he's going to tell you to fuck off rather than tell you what to do. And I appreciate that. But at the same time, you have to know how to speak to him and kind of translate that stuff. Because, like I said, if you're not a former player and you don't understand his mindset, it's really hard to really understand where he's at in some things. But when you really understand the game at a high level and you understand where he comes from, you'll be surprised at how talented and how insanely smart this guy is. You just got to give this. So that's where I relate a lot to him, actually, where it's like my success, at least when I was a pro player, came a big part into my setting. Because if I had a team of people around me that didn't believe in me or questioned every single thing that I did, it would probably make my job more difficult. But because I had people who empowered me and took the chance to understand me and have conversations back and forth, that was probably the biggest part of my success. And I think that's where I relate the most to Ye, where I think his skill is always going to be top notch, but he's more of a setting guy than a skill guy. You got to get him in the right setting, right atmosphere, and that's where you're going to get the best out of him. And that's probably why he had so much success at Optic, because people like FNS and stuff like that understood that and were able to capitalize off of that. And now he's kind of like, not a journeyman, that's a really bad word to kind of put on him like that, but he's kind of going around and doing his thing like that. It's like you're just a pit stop, and at the same time, you're not really getting that kind of connection that you need from your setting, your coach, all that stuff. And I feel like if he can find that somewhere, he'll be back to his old form. He's really got to strive for that. And I think that's not a him thing. That's more of an org thing. It's kind of like where you look at some of these orgs that are making these big moves, whether it's like the Leviathans of the world, like getting Aspas and stuff. Like, you got to cater your team around your franchise player. You can't just expect to slot a franchise player in and have him go do magic. Like, going back to like me in 3D, like, you would expect me to join 3D and start bringing you championships. It don't work that way, dude. Especially if I would have realized how Rambo and how other people think about the game. I'm like, man, we got to rework, we got to rewire everything. It's going to take some time. And it's like, my setting was the biggest ingredient to my success. And I think a lot of these guys are eventually going to have to learn that. And some of us learn that after the fact, unfortunately. And so that's why my job as a coach is try and prevent them from failing if I can. But at the end of the day, we're all going to have to learn our own ways,
In this esports world, it can seem like everyone's against you, but I've always got the Skrilluminati, my Patreon community, riding with me. And it is thanks to the support of the following people, this video and all of them on my channel are made possible. Matt, Pugnacho Rakula, Ahmed Haju, Frisky, Tosh, Jensen Gore, Animosity, Toucan, Tobias Bernasconi. If you've ever watched my videos, you know now I'm going to give a massive shout out to Jerky's Minion, the main man. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want teasers? Find out who the upcoming interview guests are. Maybe you want to ask me a question. I tend to answer them at length in my video AMA. Do you want to take part in one of those dinner discussions where we talk about what you're interested in esports? Well, if any of these perks or more appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Skrilluminati today, where in the description box below is a Patreon link.